I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks for being here. We're going to start this morning with red flag warnings going up across the Gulf as Helene lashes Mexico with 50-mile-per-hour winds and dumps more than 6 inches of rain in the region, flooding roads and knocking out power to many of the smaller islands near Cuba.
Helene is now pushing through the Caribbean on its way to the U.S., and the Gulf Coast of Florida is preparing for impact. They're filling up sandbags, stocking up on supplies, and boarding up businesses. Forecasters warn parts of the state could get hit with life-threatening storm surges of up to 15 feet. In just a moment, we're going to speak with Chief Barbara Tripp from the Tampa Fire Rescue Department. They are bracing for the storm, but first, let's check in with meteorologist Angie Lassman to get the latest on Helene's path.
Angie, good morning.
Good morning, guys. We've got a lot to cover with this system here over the next 36 hours to 48 hours. Here's those tropical alerts that are up for a lot of course, the state of Florida and much of Georgia and stretching up into the Carolinas. Notice that hurricane warning stretches into southern Georgia. Here's what we know about the system right now. It's got winds of 65 miles per hour. As of that latest update just a little while ago, that came up just a touch. We saw pressure come down just a little bit. So it's showing signs of strengthening, and that's to be expected. This is exactly how we kind of expected this to play out over this time period. It is moving right now northwest at 9 miles per hour. Notice the center of it, which isn't all that well defined, is sitting just about 45 miles to the east-northeast of Mexico. Now, the center of it likely going to pass, kind of just brush past Cancun, and then it enters these really warm waters. We're talking about potentially a Category 1 hurricane by later today, and then it spends some time over those warm waters that I mentioned, an environment that's really going to be conducive for further strengthening. We could be talking about rapid intensification with this system with a low shear environment and plenty of moisture to tap into. That means that we're going to see a stronger hurricane on its approach to Florida. The cone right now does include the Big Bend area and parts of the Panhandle. Tampa not included in that. But what makes this system so different is that it is large. It's expansive and it's fast moving, and that's going to do a couple of things for us. It will continue moving north up into parts of the southeast, and there's going to be a heavy rain threat that's going to be impressive for folks there and definitely impactful. This system I mentioned, quite large. Notice how far that tropical storm wind field extends from the center. So that basically encompasses almost the entirety of the state of Florida. That means that we've got a lot strong winds extending well out from the center. So those impacts are going to extend out well from the center. So even where it makes landfall, there's going to be impacts far from that. That means that storm surge will be larger and for a larger area, as well as the wind damage is going to be for a larger area too. We could see hurricane force winds move through Tallahassee, depending on exactly where the center of that is. Storm surge impressive, of course, closer to the center, 10 to 15 feet. You see Cedar Key, Keaton Beach included in that. But the Tampa Bay area, 4 to 8 feet. I mean, that's going to be impressive. We'll see, of course, washed out roads. We'll see large and dangerous waves. And then on top of that, guys, we have a flood risk that's going to be quite impressive, extending up into the Carolinas. That is going to last Thursday and Friday. And we could see upwards of over a foot of rain in some of these spots.
It's just amazing how quickly these storms can just grow and intensify.
And how fast it is moving is quite impressive, and that means that the threats are further inland, not just right at the coast like we often see with similar systems that have come on shore in a similar location.
Angie Lassman, thank you so much. We'll see you in a little bit. Let's bring in Chief Barbara Tripp with the Tampa Fire Rescue Department. Good morning, Chief. Thank you very much for your time on what is sure to be a busy day. Let's talk about your preparations. Tampa really will start to feel the impacts, as we just heard there, from the storm around midnight tonight into the early morning hours of Thursday. What kind of things are you and your team doing today to get ready for what you might see tonight?
Well, thank you so much for having me here. But once again, we are continuing to prepare our communities. We've been offering sandbags for the community to assist with some flooding that we're expecting. And of course, when the storm started up, Tampa was in a cone. And of course, as it intensified more out in the Gulf, changes have adjusted. But one of the things that we're going to have is problems with flooding and, of course, the surge that's going to come after the storm passes through.
A few years ago, I was in Tampa bracing for a big hurricane to come. And one thing I learned is just how vulnerable Tampa can be. It has a lot of bridges and canals which can easily flood. A lot of places could be impacted by a large storm surge. And on top of that, this is forming and intensifying very quickly. That's giving folks less time to prepare. So what is your message to people in your community? How long could it take before they could get help if there is a problem?
Well, one of the things we want the community not to do is be complacent. You know, over the last couple of months since hurricane season started, you know, we have been very blessed to not have certain things that take place when the storms have actually hit. And sometimes, you know, community says, well, it's not going to hit us, but then it's the aftermath that take place. You know, currently we have what we call a Florida Task Force team, which is urban search and rescue, that's going to assist throughout the state of Florida with anyone that's in need. So we just ask the community to continue to prepare their homes, listen to the information that's put out through the media. And if you're told to evacuate, please don't take it lightly. It's a reason that we inform the community to evacuate because of the low-lying areas. You know, we always tell them to, you know, run from the water and hide from the wind. And one of the problems that we're going to have, as you stated, is we're going to have a lot of flooding, and we want everyone to be safe.
We've got reminders here in our studio, even a big graphic here. It says, fill up gas tanks, learn those evacuation zones. As you're saying, heed those warnings. Chief Tripp, this is the strongest storm to make landfall in over a year. But we do know that people in the area, we understand, are still cleaning up from Hurricane Debbie, which just hit in early August. Do you feel, are the people of Tampa ready for another major storm like this? Are those preparations underway? And tell us some of your biggest concerns.
So as far as the preparations, we continue throughout the city of Tampa and Hillsborough County to make sure that our storm water is clear. We make sure, as far as when it comes to flooding in the community, we make sure that those roads are clear. But of course, if you have, you know, 1 hour of heavy rains, we're talking about 4 and 5 feet of rain, of course, that's going to impact the community. So one of the things we try to put out is to make sure, as continue to prep your area, you should be familiar with your evacuation zones. You should have a plan. You should have your hurricane kit. You should take care of your families and make sure that they're prepared for situations like this. And when we're talking about constantly preparing the community, we advise them, we open shelters for families that are in certain areas to be able to come to a safe haven that will be able to deal with this type of category of a storm.
Chief Tripp, we really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much. We're thinking about your community.
Thank you.
We are also following breaking news out of Capitol Hill this morning. Lawmakers just released a bipartisan interim report on their investigation into the security failures that led to the first assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. That's the one that happened in July in Butler, Pennsylvania.
In the report from a Senate committee, investigators say that a series of, quote, foreseeable and, quote, preventable mistakes led to the vulnerable protection of Mr. Trump at that rally. The report also says that those people who are responsible for the planning of security that day have, quote, deflected blame.
There's a lot to go over. We have NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley joining us now with the latest on this. Ryan, good morning. So the report, just the beginning, break down what we're learning from this report about what went wrong leading up to that outdoor rally in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that's right, Joe. So one of the things that really jumped out to me from this report is the number of sort of tech fails that you've seen in the course that led up to this attack and allowed the gunman to get off those shots that killed a man and struck Donald Trump's ear. In one instance, there was actually an unmanned aircraft detector, essentially, that they had been able to set up, but they were delayed by tech issues. They couldn't get it to connect. Eventually, they talked to someone on their tech team, and it turned out that they needed an Ethernet cord. They didn't have an Ethernet cord, so they actually borrowed an Ethernet cord from the Trump audio-visual team and connected it. And they got that system up and running. The only issue was that the gunman had stopped flying the drone about 30 minutes before they got that system online. So, you know, there's often this thing that there's these really complex conspiracy theories that we've seen grow out of this, but often the simplest explanation is the best. And that's sort of what this report sort of lays out, that there are these sort of expected issues that you might see with a massive bureaucracy, especially when it comes to communications and tech, that left the former president vulnerable that day.
Ryan, let's talk about the second assassination attempt, apparent assassination attempt. This one comes just a day after federal prosecutors officially charged the person involved in that. His name's Ryan Wesley Ruth, with attempted assassination of a presidential candidate. Ruth was arrested after he was found, as our viewers probably remember, hiding in a bush. He had that assault-style rifle. This was outside Mr. Trump's golf course in Florida. Ultimately, Secret Service fired several shots at him. In this indictment, it also comes with several new charges for Ruth. What are the latest details?
Yeah, so these are much more serious charges. And sort of the way that this played out is that initially there were charges against this individual that were sort of lower level, but were basically just meant to keep him behind bars. The prosecutors wanted him locked up to make sure that he wasn't sent on pretrial release. And they succeeded in that effort. The judge ordered him to be detained. And then, yesterday you had a federal grand jury return these more serious charges. So Donald Trump had initially accused the Justice Department of sort of underplaying this. And what we now know is that he was wrong. Essentially what the DOJ was doing is what they normally do. They bring forward the charges that they can prove at that point, or they think they can prove at that point, as a reason to hold an individual, and then they let the federal grand jury do its work and bring those more serious charges down the line. So this is something, for this instance, that this individual could be incarcerated for the remainder of their living days on Earth, for the rest of their life. So that's something, it's very serious charges that they brought forward here, and really shows that the Justice Department is making this a huge priority.
Ryan, on top of all this, we're also learning the Office of the Director of National Intelligence has now confirmed it has briefed Mr. Trump on what the campaign called real and specific threats from Iran to assassinate him. What else have we learned?
Yeah, so, we also know about this Iranian plot to hack his campaign emails, according to federal authorities, and that's sort of this ongoing effort. So it is this complex situation where you essentially have Donald Trump, who is this target and the subject of federal investigations, is also being briefed by separate components of the FBI. He's got those 2 federal criminal cases against him on the one hand, but then you also have these briefings, this internal information. So it's this really complex, sort of unprecedented situation in American history, because, Donald Trump could be in the White House in a few months, but he's also a criminal target and a criminal defendant in the federal system, simultaneously getting info from the federal system because of his role as the Republican nominee for president of the United States.
All right, Ryan Riley. Ryan, thank you.
Well, police in Arizona are investigating after shots were fired through the windows at Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign office in Tampa, Arizona. Workers in the office called police after finding the bullet holes when they arrived to work on Monday. You're looking at them right there. They say someone also shot the same windows with what appeared to be a BB or pellet gun last week. Now police say they are stepping up patrols in the area in an effort to prevent any further issues. President Biden delivered his final speech as the leader of the United States to the UN General Assembly yesterday, where he sought to reaffirm America's role on the world stage.
In his parting words, the president hoped for a diplomatic solution to the war in the Middle East and said Russia had failed in its war with Ukraine. Mr. Biden is expected to sit down with Ukraine's President Zelensky tomorrow after the Ukrainian leader delivers his UN speech this morning.
We've got NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli here on set with us yet again, which is very exciting. Mike, great to have you here. Thank you so much for being here. So let's start with the Middle East. As Israel's biggest ally, obviously, people were really paying attention to what the president would have to say about, of course, the ongoing war in Gaza. Also, though, this new front with Lebanon. And it comes as we know that Prime Minister Netanyahu was in town at the same event, but they were not scheduled to speak. How was this issue handled?
Yeah, that's right. This is a speech that, by its nature, covers a lot of ground. The president calling attention to some topics like the war in Sudan, for instance, that he doesn't think is getting enough attention. But everyone in that room and everyone around the world wanted to hear what he had to say about the growing unrest in the Middle East. The president would have loved to come there yesterday to announce more progress towards a ceasefire agreement. That's not the case. And now you have this threat of really a full-scale war with Lebanon. Listen to how the president addressed this topic.
Full-scale war is not in anyone's interest. Even if the situation has escalated, a diplomatic solution is still possible. In fact, it remains the only path to lasting security to allow the residents from both countries to return to their homes and the border safely. And that's what we're working tirelessly to achieve.
Now, what's interesting about what we heard there is that's a message as much directed as the Israelis as potentially bad actors, because President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu, they have not spoken in a month. There are reports, including from NBC News, that we have less visibility into their war plans. And so the president tried to make an argument in Israelis' interest, saying that focusing on Iran is the more important task right now, and de-escalation is what's needed.
Let's talk about the other big topic the president addressed, and that is the war between Russia and Ukraine. What was the president's message, and then what can we expect from this meeting with President Zelensky tomorrow?
I mean, we're going to be talking about 3 years of this war in Ukraine before you know it, and the president saying we face a choice very soon. This is one very much tied to our own election here. Will we continue to stand with Ukraine, or will we abandon it? I thought it was notable he invoked Vice President Harris's name in that part of the speech. It's the first time he's done that in a UN speech. And it speaks to the fact that, right, if President Trump is successful, we may not see that continued support. President Trump has been talking about it, including just yesterday on the campaign trail. And so the president's holding a meeting today here that Zelensky may attend to talk about the reconstruction of Ukraine, but the focus will be on that meeting tomorrow at the White House with Vice President Harris as well, also having her own solo meeting.
There was a moment where the president sort of referenced the fact that he's no longer seeking re-election. Obviously, he's been on the stage several times. He has been in this game generally, president or not, for a long time, and knows and has a lot of relationships, deep relationships with people in this room. Tell us about what he said and how he'll be remembered with this group.
Yeah, I think we all wondered whether he would address that elephant in the room, the fact that this is his last speech. And he started there yesterday. He talked about the fact that 50 years he's been engaging in foreign policy. He joked about his age, but then listen to the way he talked about the decision he made not to seek another term and the message for the room.
Being president has been the honor of my life. There's so much more I want to get done. As much as I love the job, I love my country more. I decided after 50 years of public service, it's time for a new generation of leadership to take my nation forward. My fellow leaders, let us never forget, some things are more important than staying in power.
Now, that is also a message that's as much about our election here, right? President Trump trying to return to power as to some of the leaders in the room, right? The president has framed this major challenge this century, democracies versus autocracies, saying, listen, we have to allow free and fair elections. Sometimes you have to hand back power.
And we cut it off there, but that line got huge applause, and that is not an easy room to get applause in. It's not like the State of the Union there.
Exactly, exactly right.
Mike Memoli, thank you very much. So great to have you on set with us for a couple of days. Well, let's stay on the topic of the Middle East this morning and get the latest. Air raid sirens sound in Tel Aviv after Israel intercepted a missile fired by Hezbollah, the militant group's first attempt to actually strike the city. The attack is the latest in a week-long wave of aggression that has plunged the Middle East into a deep state of uncertainty.
On Tuesday, thousands of people fled southern Lebanon as Israel continued to pound Hezbollah targets there. Israel said it would accelerate its campaign against the Iran-backed militant group as the two sides continue to trade strikes. So far, the offensive has killed more than 550 people. NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez joins us now from Haifa, Israel, with more. Raf, good morning. So tell us about this attempted strike on Tel Aviv this morning.
Joe, Savannah, good morning. Israel's military says this was a long-range surface-to-surface missile with a heavy warhead fired by Hezbollah towards Tel Aviv. And it is, according to the Israeli government, the first time in the decades that Israel and Hezbollah have been fighting that the Iranian-backed militant group have targeted Tel Aviv itself. You hear those sirens there, people woken up in the early hours of the morning running to bomb shelters. Now, this missile was intercepted by the David Sling missile defense system. That's according to the Israeli military. There were no casualties, but this is indicative of Hezbollah's ambition to strike deeper into Israel. According to the Israeli military, they say around 300 rockets and missiles were fired yesterday. Nobody was killed in Israel despite that barrage. Of course, as you mentioned, that is not the case on the other side of the border in Lebanon, where there is no missile defense. There are very few bomb shelters. At this point, the death toll around 600 people, including around 50 children. Guys.
So, Raf, Israel has said that it will not back down in its campaign against Hezbollah, despite these casualty numbers that we're seeing within Lebanon. What's kind of different here, though, right, is we know the stated goals with Hamas, with their war in Gaza, is to eliminate Hamas. We also understand that the U.S. now, as Mike just pointed out, has less visibility into Israel's plans when it comes to this fight with Lebanon. Do we have an idea of what Israel's plan going forward is as this conflict escalates, especially as we see strikes attempted all the way into Tel Aviv?
Well, Savannah, that's exactly right. Israel has set this very broad set of goals for this military operation in Lebanon. They say they want to push Hezbollah back from the border. They want to degrade its military infrastructure. They want to create conditions so that it's safe for tens of thousands of Israeli civilians displaced from their homes to go back to where they live. None of that is an easy lift. We spoke yesterday to a member of parliament from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's governing Likud party, and I asked him, are you prepared for a conflict with Hezbollah that continues at this level of intensity for months? Take a listen to what he had to say.
I don't know, but it will take as much as it needs to take. But we will not live with such barbaric enemy in the north. This is our commitment to our citizens, and I expect the free world to stand with us. We want our citizens to live free, to live their lives in security, and we are attacking now the Hezbollah. They will pay. They will pay for the attack that they started without any provocation from our side 11 months ago, and we are going to win this war.
And guys, I can tell you, while there is rocket fire coming from Lebanon into northern Israel, there is a feeling in this country that this could be a whole lot worse, and there is a sense of relief. What is not clear is whether Hezbollah's fire is more limited because of the intense military pressure that Israel is putting on them, or if it is more limited because Hezbollah is trying to avoid further escalation at this point. And the answer to that question, I think, will determine a big part of where this goes next.
So, I mean, Raf, as thousands of people continue to flee as these cross-border strikes show no signs of letting up, just how are people coping there? I have to imagine that they sometimes have a difficult time getting to safety.
Yeah, you can see on your screen there, Joe, you know, these enormous convoys of people fleeing southern Lebanon, trying to get north, trying to get safety. You've got whole families loaded into the backs of trucks. They are carrying whatever possessions they can grab with them on the way out the door. So this is a major, major humanitarian crisis unfolding in Lebanon. You know, one difference from Gaza, people do have somewhere to go. Lebanon is much larger than Gaza, but you have hospitals overwhelmed with the number of wounded, and you have a lot of families unsure right now how to get to safety.
All right. Raf Sanchez. Raf, thank you so much.
Well, we are approaching 1 year since the deadly October 7th Hamas attack on Israel that started this all. In an emotional interview, nightly news anchor Lester Holt spoke with one hostage who was released earlier this year, as well as family members of hostages still being held by Hamas. All of them say they feel broken but are hanging on to hope and pleading for U.S. officials to do everything they can to bring their loved ones home.
It's been nearly a year now since we first saw their faces, those kidnapped by Hamas terrorists on October 7th, including the families of these Americans who we spoke to today.
Are you fearful that the world's attention is shifting away from Gaza and the hostages?
We're here today, again, to appeal to the people of the world that are failing to see who are the innocents here. You know, the innocents are our loved ones and the citizens of Gaza and the region that just want de-escalation and just want the war to end, and that should start with the release of the hostages.
We've been speaking with these families since their nightmare began, but this is our first conversation with Aviva Siegel. She was a hostage herself, freed last year, but her husband Keith is still being held.
Keith and the hostages are thrown underneath the ground on a filthy, dirty mattress with no human rights. They're not allowed to talk. They're not allowed to move. It's dark there. They've got no oxygen. But for us, worrying about them, and me, sick to my stomach, worried about Keith and the hostages, because they're there and they're just waiting. What will be the next thing the Hamas terrorists will do to them? If they're going to rape them again, starve them again, hit them again. I was there in those same conditions, and I thought that I'm going to die all the time.
It's hard to hear these stories. And Yael, what is it like to hear these stories for you?
Yael's 20-year-old son, Idan, was also kidnapped.
It's very hard stories to hear. Like, I'm worried sick for the well-being of Idan. Every time that I'm meeting Aviva, I'm giving her like the biggest hug that I can, and I'm feeling like I'm hugging Idan, because to see her, it's a miracle for me. She's like an angel.
Mika is Idan's sister.
It was so surreal, like texting and talking to Idan like 2 days before, and then hearing on October 7th that I was just not going to be talking to him, and now it's been a year. So it's been like a year that like my best friend like that I was growing up with has just been like gone from my life. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
It's been very difficult.
And Aviva, at the same time, looking at you here, it is a sign of hope that it is possible.
It's a sign of hope, but I want to tell you that I look strong, but I'm broken up into pieces for all the families and the hostages that are there. I'm going to scream as much as I can until they come back.
How would you describe this past year?
We simply just miss them so deeply, so deeply. My sister and her husband's bodies are being held as bargaining chips still in Gaza.
We cannot do anything besides trying to think how to get back Itai home, and no joy in our life.
The group has met frequently with Biden administration officials.
Is there a deal to be done, perhaps between just the U.S., an independent deal? Is that doable?
I believe that the administration needs to look at all of its basic assumptions, reevaluate them each day all over again, and see what is the best way to get its citizens out, that the U.S. has an obligation to get them out of harm's way.
Governments at this point, in order to end the madness, have to be willing to get out of their comfort zones to press Hamas first and foremost.
1 year on, it's almost too much to bear.
Lester, walking up here from the train this morning, a person saw my shirt and kind of threw haphazardly, "Do you really think there's anyone alive there?" And I told him, "Yes, I do. It's my son there." "What do you mean?" "Yes, my son is there." Can you imagine what a nightmare it is to wake up every morning and not know if your child is alive, to know that they're in this horrible conditions for almost a year now, and that their life is at stake every single day?
So powerful. Our thanks to Lester Holt for bringing us those interviews.
And our thanks to those families for continuing
Absolutely.
to share their story.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.